page 14, the Mishnah, מסככין בנסרים דברי רבי יהודה ורבי מאיר אוסר. Look at this sukkah. We have here a schach, and we have here a board. This board is 4 handbreadth. So Rabbeinu Ovadia Mebartanua explains that if those boards, for example, are 3, that's fine, that makes the sukkah kosher. The moment it exceeded the 3, if it's 4 handbreadth, then it's already a problem. Now, here he said, Rabbi Yehuda said that you can hold this part and have a cover for the sukkah. And the question is, obviously a board, if you use a board like that, it's something that it's originally Gidulo min haaretz, it's grown from the land, and also it's not receive any ritual impurity. So what's the idea? The idea is that as long as the person is not sleeping under that domain, he can use it as part of the schach. However, the Rabbi Meir oser, Rabbi Meir said that it's a problem. Now, the question is, what's the idea of Rabbi Meir? So later in the Gemara we explain. In general, the Gemara tells us that it's according to Shmuel, it's any board that have this size of 4 handbreadth, you cannot use it because it looks like a house like a ceiling of a regular house. But here the machloket is any neser, any board that's between 3 and 4. In other words, 4, everyone said that it's a problem, it's pasul. If it's between 3 and 4, then it's a question if we consider that lavud, as we discussed in Eruvin, or not. Next part in the Mishnah, they said, נתן עליה נסר שהוא רחב 4 טפחים כשרה ובלבד שלא יישן תחתיו. So here, basically, we start explaining it earlier, but here, you see in this picture, he put this neser, this board, and they have 4 handbreadth. So they said it's okay as long as he's not sleeping there. Now you see here a little bit the size. Here is less than 3 handbreadth. It's kosher for schach. This is the machloket, if it's in between, and if it's total 4 handbreadth, then it's pasul, it's invalid for the schach. So in short, let's wrap up our Mishnah, then we can go to the Gemara and explain it better. We have a schach. The schach has condition. 1, it has to be grown from the ground, on original part of the schach. Number 2, it has to be something that it's not receiving a ritual impurity. We ask a question if a person wants to use some type of board as part of the schach. And we explain that anything below than 3 handbreadth, it's fine. Anything that is total 4 handbreadth is a problem. Okay? If it's between 3 and 4, it's a disputation between these 2 Tanaim, 2 rabbis. And we said, even the one who said that it's okay, a person cannot sleep under that domain. Gemara, אמר רב מחלוקת בין שרים שיש בהם 4. דרבי מאיר אית לגזירת תקרה, ורבי יהודה לית לגזירת תקרה, אבל בין שרים שאין בהם רוחב 4, דברי הכל כשרה. So here is the point, as we said, if it looks like a ceiling of a house. So the disputation between the 2 is a decree, rabbinic decree, that it looks like a ceiling of the house. If they don't have that, then it's not an issue. So Rabbi Meir carries that decree and he says, we have the point of Sukkot that we need to leave our permanent home and dwell in a place that it's, in a way, our permanent residence for a week, but it's not a feeling of a house. The Torah used the term basukot teshvu, you should dwell in the Sukkot for 7 days. So it means that a person has to leave the permanent home that he lives all year around, and then he goes to a place that it's Sukkah. So yes, he needs to dwell there for a week, but still it's not a feeling of a permanent residency of ceiling, a permanent ceiling. ושמואל אמר, בשאין בהם ארבעה מחלוקת. אבל יש בהם ארבעה דברי הכל פסולה. שמואל tells us a very important yesod, very important foundation. He said, if it's carried the 4 handbreadth, then it's a disputation. Rabbi Yehuda said somehow it's okay to use it for schach, because he said that it's narrow, it doesn't look like a ceiling of a house, etc. Rabbi Meir said that even if less, there's still part of the decree and we should not use it. So we have to remember that Neser, the board, it's issue of validity, it's issue if it's fitting. Sukkah, if you talk about Sukkah, which is the condition of Sukkah, we said many times, is 7 by 7 handbreadth, then it's fine. So he said here, ואין בהם ארבעה, ואפילו פחות משלושה, הקנים בעל מנינו. So we said in general, if you use something like kanim, those pieces of you can use it as branches, you can use bamboo, all these things is under the category, it's called psolet goren v'yekev, something that we use for any type of winery, or they use sometimes in those days to use a total, in a way, reeds, or things like bamboo. So what you see here, the sages don't have an issue of a board. The only issue is the size. אמר רב פאפא אחי כמה, יש בהם 4 דברי הכל פסולה, פחות מ3 דברי הכל כשרה, מייתם הקנים בעל מנינו. So he said clearly, as we said earlier, less than 3, it's not an issue. 4, everyone said it's not. Here we have kipligi, only the disputation in משלושה עד 4. If it's a little more than 3 hand breadth and little less than 4. So then it's not just a regular kanim, it's not regular reeds. Mar savar, Rabbi Yehuda hold, כיוון דלייתנו שיעור מקום חשוב, because in the length it doesn't have the size of 4 handbreadth, לא גזרינן, we don't hold it as a ceiling, and therefore it's not an issue. Mar savar מכיוון דנפקא מתורת לבוד גזרינן. We discussed in the Tractate Eruvin several times. There is a concept that's called a lavud. Lavud is something that has the size of 3 handbreadth. So they said the moment it's exceeded more than that, then it's considered a satum. It's like total seal, and there's no space there. Tana, נתן עליה נסר שהוא רחב 4 תפרים כשרה, ובלבד שלא יישן תחתיו. So we said earlier, if a person put a neser, he put a board, and the size of 4 handbreadth. So the Mishnah said, fine, you can use it with one condition, that you see this is, let's say this is a 4. But as long as a person is not sleeping in this domain, the Mishnah said it's fine. So now the question is, בישלמה לשמואל דאמר שאין בהם 4 מחלוקת. אבל יש בהם 4 דברי הכל פסולה, משום מה לא יישן תחתיו. So we understand it according to Shmuel that he said that if they have a 4 handbreadth, it's a disputation between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. So therefore, the sukkah is unfit, and therefore obviously he shouldn't sleep in that domain. אלא לרב דאמר יש בהם 4 מחלוקת, אבל אין בהם 4 דברי הכל כשרה, לרבי יהודה אמר לו יישן תחתיו. But according to what we said, that the only disputation is if they have 4. But if anything below than 4, it's not an issue, so why a person cannot sleep under that domain? So the Gemara responds and said, Mi savar divrei hakoli, do you tell me that it's according to everyone? He said, Seifa atan leRabbi Meir. The last clause follow the Rabbi Meir, which means only according to Rabbi Meir, that he forbids to use this type of board. So therefore, if he put that board in the side of the sukkah close to its wall, the rest of the sukkah is kshera, is befitting, because it's called a curved wall. It's dofen akuma. But if that area it's considering a unfit schach, So therefore, he needs to go the other part of the sukkah and sleep. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that this part is okay, so then it's not an issue to sleep under that part. Tashma. So we derive from another braita. Shnei sdinim. If a person use 2 sheets that place over the roofing of the sukkah. So he said, mitztarfin, you can have them joined together, and it's considering a 4 handbreadth, the measure that unfit roofing that render the sukkah unfit. So that's basically the full part. I tried to find a picture, but basically it's like, imagine that you have a sukkah in the middle of the sukkah. Instead of have it here on the side, you have it in the middle, and you have 2 sheets in both sides, 2 handbreadth each. So they said that you can join together and make them look like a 4. That's the way Rashi explained. 14b, שני נסרים אין מצטרפים. But if you have 2 boards, you cannot make them together as pasul. And he said, that's basically on Rashi opinion, because that Rabbi Yehuda said that even he put a schach entirely with the board is fine, in the size of even 4 handbreadth or more. Shmuel hold that it's only below than 4 handbreadth. Rabbi Meir Omer, af nesarim kesdinim. He said you can say that the same way as you have an issue with a board, you have an issue with those sheets that they can combine to forbid the sukkah. Now we elaborate on that. So we understand according to Shmuel that he said that those board doesn't have the 4 handbreadth. So then we understand that there is a disputation in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda allow them to use for schach, and Rabbi Meir have an issue, he forbade them. אבל יש בהם 4 דברי הכל פסולה. But if they have 4 handbreadth, everyone said that the sukkah is not valid. So, מה הם מצטרפים? So what the meaning of Rabbi Meir that said that those boards can combine to make the sukkah invalid? So he said מצטרפים ל4, so they can combine in 4 handbreadth to make the sukkah invalid. אלא לרב דאמר יש בהם 4 מחלוקת, אבל אין בהם 4 דברי הכל כשרה, איך דמי. But according to Rav, that he said that those boards, if they have 4 handbreadth, is a disputation between the Tanaim. But however, if you use those schach that doesn't have 4 handbreadth, everyone said that it's befitting hechedami. Give me an example. If you tell me that they have 4 handbreadth, so why you need to combine both to make the sukkah invalid? Because each of them have the size to make this invalid. If you tell me that those board does not have a 4 handbreadth, why the sukkah is invalid? It's just a regular reeds that you can use for schach. So the Gemarrah said, "Le'olam de'it b'u You have to say that the all it really speaks about 4 handbreadth or more. What Rabbi Meir meant when he said that only the sukkah is invalid when you combine a different board, מצטרפים ל4 אמות מן הצד. They can combine in 4 cubits from the side of the sukkah. So it means only in the side of the sukkah, then the schach, the cover, it's if it's not fitting, can make the sukkah invalid. So that's one way to understand it. For sure, we have here several other views. I'm just going here by Rashi. The Aruch Laner is a book called Aruch Laner, and Ritva goes a little different. Lishnachrina, another option. Bishlama l'Shmuel damar b'shen b'hem 4 machloket. We understand by the way of Shmuel that he said that those boards, if they don't have 4 handbreadth, it's a disputation between the Tanaim that hold that if it's below than 4 hand breadth, it's a problem. אבל יש בהם 4. דברי הכל פסולה. However, if they have 4 hand breadth, according to everyone, the sukkah is invalid. מה הם מצטרפים? What Rabbi Meir meant when he said that you can combine, join together and make them invalid. So you have to say that those boards carries 4 hand breadth each in the walls of the sukkah. מצטרפים ל4 אמות מן הצד. So it means each individual would not combine, but when you put it in the walls, you can combine it together. So again, as far as the schach, you need to have 4 hand breadth. And Tosfot explained that Rabbi Yehuda disagree, and he hold that even you combine them, that's not make it invalid, because according to his view, still for schach it's befitting, even it's applied to dwell, sit in the sukkah, the entire sukkah. Now, for sure, as I said before, there are others beside those Tosfot and Rashi who goes a little different in explanation. I'm just going by the pshat, the simple way. אלא לרב בישלמה לרבי מאיר, מה הם מצטרפים? So what does that mean when Rabbi Meir said that you can combine them? מצטרפים ל400 מן הצד, which means if you put in the wall several boards, so if they combine to the size of 4 cubits, so you can use it as a dofen akuma, as a wall. It's not straight, and the entire sukkah is invalid. אלא רבי יהודה אמר, אפילו יש בהם 4 כשרה, מה הם מצטרפים? But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it said that even they have 4 hand breadth, it's fitting. What is the meaning in the Braita that say that those boards not combined to make the sukkah invalid? So they said, kanim be'alma nidhu. So it's not just a regular reeds, but here we speak about reeds that it's in the very basic one, which means you can put them on a schach and you can dwell under that. So that's the meaning of the sentence, 2 boards cannot combine. So they cannot combine in a sense to make the entire sukkah invalid, but anyway, as far as the schach, it's unfitting and you cannot sit in that domain. For sure, we're not yet in a practical halacha, but there is a lot of mefarshim here. You have the Pnei Yoshua and the Rashash and others that dwell on this. Aide de Ke'amar, so Gemara responds, according to Rabbi Meir, it's really fitting to use for cover the sukkah entirely with the board that carries a size of 4 hand breadth. And what you ask, if it's befitting schach, why they use the language of not combining? We said, Aide de Ke'amar Rabbi Meir mitztarfin, Amar Rabbi Yehuda en mitztarfin. The way that Rabbi Meir said that those boards combine to be a 4 cubit from the side to make the sukkah invalid, the Rabbi Yehuda said that they're not combined. So it means Rabbi Yehuda himself hold that those boards they are fitting for schach, for the entire sukkah. Tanya Kvatei de Rav, Tanya Kvatei de Shmuel. So now we completed this Shakla Betara, this talk. We found one brayta that followed the way of Rab, which means that Rabbi Yehuda allowed to cover even board that has the size of 4 hand breadth, and we found another brayta that followed the Shmuel that even Rabbi Yehuda not allowed to use the schach only for those board less than 4 hand breadth. Tanik vater de Rav, sikecha bin sarim shel erez. So if he uses cedar for those schach, she'en b'hem arba'ah, that doesn't have a size of 4 hand breadth, divrei akol kshera. Everyone said that this sukkah is fitting. Yesh b'hem arba'ah, but if they have 4 hand breadth, Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Rabbi Meir invalidated the sukkah, Rabbi Yehuda allowed to use it. Now, we understand, according to the way that Rav said, that the disputation between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda applies to those boards that have the size of 4 handbreadth. So, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, I can prove it. Maaseh bishat sakana. They speaks about the era that the Roman who control the land of Israel put a decree that they should not do mitzvot. It's a famous story. So שהביאו נסרים שהיו בהם 4. So they want to circumvent those enemies that forbade us to fulfill the mitzvot. So what did they do? They brought these boards that they carry those boards a size of 4 handbreadth. So therefore the enemies thought that this is basically for the houses, and they didn't know that it's applied to the mitzvah of sukkah. וסיככנו לדבר מספסל וישבנו תחתיהם. So what they do, we use the balcony and we put those boards there, and we use it at that time. So so Ritva said, it's clearly if it's a time of danger, it makes no sense to have a schach that it's unfitting, because if the sukkah is not fitting, so therefore it's not making the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah. So they said, אמרו לו, משם ראיה, אין שעת סכנה ראיה. Come on. They said, you cannot bring a proof from the time of dangers. This time of dangers, it's a different story. Usually, any boards that it's in a size of 4 handbreadth, it's not fitting. But because the old decree applies to what? To a rabbinic decree, the Ritva said. So therefore they did it in order to make sure that people remember to do this mitzvah. But there are those, the Mishnah Berurah brought it, to say that even in those circumstances you can make the mitzvah of leishav basukah, dwell in the sukkah. But when it start bringing, Rav Yehuda start bringing something like that as a proof for day by day, then they have an issue with that, because they said you cannot compare it. Again, Tosfot on page 3 said it's all question how far you go with rabbinic decree versus Torah law, because in the Torah laws it appear that you, after the fact, you can fulfill the mitzvah in that type of sukkah. But there is a book my brother-in-law publicized, was written by a giant rabbi. It's called Chilkat Yoav. In that book, he elaborates on this in this question. Anyway, Tanya Kvatei de Shmuel. We learn another braita according to word of Shmuel, that he said that the disputation applies only to those boards at less than 4 handbreadth. סיככה בנסרים של ארז, שיש בהם 4, דברי הכל פסולה, אין בהם 4, רבי מאיר פוסל ורבי יהודה מכשיר. So again, if you use a Caesar, that has a 4 handbreadth, everyone said that it's unfitting. But if it's not reached a point of 4 handbreadth, so if, for example, it's a 3 or a little more than 3, Rabbi Meir said that that sukkah, it's not valid. That's the way Rav Papa explained earlier. And Rabbi Yehuda allowed, ומודה רבי מאיר. However, even Rabbi Meir said that it's a problem, שאם יש בנסר לנסר כמלוא נסר, שמניח פסל ביניהם וכשרה. So imagine a situation that he's using something that is below than 4 handbreadth. But what did he do instead? He put a space in between and put a kosher schach in between and then continue with others. So I don't know if in your Gemarrah you have pictures, but it's like, imagine a situation that you have 4 handbreadth a board and then a regular branches, and again 4 handbreadth and So if you go like that, so then he said that the sukkah is fitting, because you remember that psolet geren v'yekev, so that's the one we have the Schach. ומודה רבי יהודה שנתן עליה נסר שהוא רחב 4 טפחים כשרה, ואין ישנים תחתיו. והישן תחתיו לא יוצא ידי חובתו. So he said if he put a board at the size of 4 handbreadth, so the Sukkah after the fact is kosher, but people cannot sleep there under that board. Itmar, הפכן על צידיהם. Again, if you take this board that exceeded, there are more than 3 and something, it's 4, and he turned the other way around, which means they have one side that is 4, and you take and turn around the board, it's shorter, it's smaller. Mm-hmm. So now, heights, it can be 4 handbreadth, all right? But the length, while you put it in the sukkah, it's less. So again, let's imagine a situation. You take this board, and this is 4 handbreadth. But what you do is you turn it around. So now, here, the what is called the width, right? The width is less. So they said, Ravuna amar psula, v'Rabbi Chizda bar Rabba bar Ravuna amar kshera. It's a disputation. One said that it's unfitting, the other one said that it's okay. Why? Because someone who dwelled there, he look up in the ceiling and he sees that those boards are less than 4 handbreadth, even less than 3 handbreadth. And for sure you don't cover a ceiling of a house with this type of this style of covering. Ikla Rav Nachman Lesura. Here is the story of Nachman, the great rabbi, went to a city of learning called Sura. We explained yesterday that's Rav that built that Jewish community and yeshivot. Ulegabei Rav Chizda bar Rabba bar Ravuna. So these 2 rabbis came before him and asked him that question. Amar lu afachan al tzidehen mau. If you take this board that have 4 handbreadth, yet he turned them around, and now we use those short part for the skach. Amar lehu psula. Na'asu keshipudim shel matechet. So he said, because the sages put a decree that he cannot use it, so those part, it turned to be like
skewers.
So yes, so that's basically invalid schach. Why? Because it's not considering gidulei karka, it's not considering something that grow on the ground. And Rambam explained in the Purusha Mishnayot, because also they are considering a vessel that render ritual impurity, and something like that, Davara mekabel tuma, someone who will render ritual impurity, is not befitting to have it as a schach. Continuing with the story, Amar lehu Ravuna, Ravuna respond to Rav Chizda, and Rabba bar Ravuna, Lo amri lehu, amri kvati. Did I told you that, because before they enter and they argue, what's going to, Rav Nachman going to say? Now he said, did I tell you that he's going to say like me? So, Amrulei, Umi amar laman tama velo kablinu minai. So, did you ever say it and we not accept it from you? Amar lo, Umi baritu minai tama velo amritet lechu. So, did you ask me why you are so quick to dispute me without asking me clearly what's the rationale, what's the reason why I'm ruling in a certain way? So, because if you ask me, I'll explain my view. So the big question here, deep line, is if it's befitting for a giant scholar like Rav to go and elaborate and explain to his student every single point of his view in order to make it clear or not. That's the way the Ritva said. Anyway, Lema Mesayya lo. We have another brighter that proof what Ravuna said. Eina machzeket kederusho verubo. If the sukkah, it's not befitting most of a person's body. We explained several times, if you are living in Manhattan, New York, and you have those big buildings that have a very small place for balcony, and you try to build a sukkah there because that's the only spot you have for building a sukkah. Now the problem is, if it's contained at least most of the person's body, his head, his body, veshulchano, which means the sukkah is less than the minimum size, which is a 7 by 7 handbreadth. That's the minimum. But, או שנפרצה בה פרצה כדי שיזדקר בה גדי בבת ראש, we explained that another condition we have to have in a sukkah, it's if you take a goat and the goat stand there, bevat rosh, you see here this picture, you see here this goat. So if the condition is that if the goat raises his head, so that's the minimum side, which means the moment they have that, then this wall is the issue. It's not considering a wall. In other words, you have to have a minimum side. In those days, that they put this side. So in order to consider something as a wall. So if it doesn't have it, which means that they have a size of 3 handbreadth, or שנתן עליה נסר שהוא רחב 4 טפחים, or as we said earlier, he put a board that has 4 handbreadth, אף על פי שלא הכניס לתוכה אלא 3 טפחים פסולה, even he puts in only 3 handbreadth from that board. In each and every of these 3 circumstances, the sukkah is unfitting. So, the reason for that. Let's go one by one. The first reason. The first scenario, that sukkah does not hold all his body, his head, his body, and his table. So the reason that it's not fitting, it's because they don't have the minimum measure to dwell in a sukkah. So again, as I said several times, if you live in a big residential building in Florida, in Manhattan, New York, and you have those very small balcony, you always have to measure if they have the size of 7 by 7, and the person can sit in the balcony and has his outside of his house either 7 by 7 handbreadth, or his table, his head and his body is entirely in the sukkah. The second scenario, it's an issue because one of the walls have a breach a size of more than 3 handbreadth from the ground, because that, and you see the goat raising his head, so that's basically caused that wall to be unfitting, and it's like the sukkah miss one of the walls, even you have partly the wall. And the third one is, because we said several times, the minimum in a sukkah you have to have 3 walls, right? And the third one is, because we said several times that the nesser, the board, has to be below than 3 handbreadth. And since you have 4, that makes the schach unfitting. So the moment you have schach that have 4 handbreadth, that's caused the entire sukkah to be invalid. Okay? Hechedam. Now we go and elaborate on that. How he can use this board that have the size of 4 handbreadth, and he covered the sukkah only 3. Said, my love, כגון שהפכן על צידיהם. So again, he took that board and he twisted and he put it on the side. So now it's no longer 4 handbreadth. So that's basically follow what we said earlier by Rav Huna, that hold that boards that have size of 4 handbreadth, it's make the schach unfitting, regardless. Even he put it on the side. So the Gemara rejected it, said, Lo, hacha b'ma'eskinan. Here we speak about kigon de anche apuma de mitalalta. So he speak about sukkah that have 3 walls, but the 4th one is open, and he put that board in a size that it's open. The ayat tlata legev ve'apik chad levar, that he put 3 handbreadth from that size of the neser of the board inside the sukkah. And the havalei psal hayosem min sukkah. This cause the schach that coming out of the sukkah. V'chol psal hayosem min sukkah nidon kasukkah. So therefore, psal hayosem min sukkah, it means that it's exceeded. It's come out of the sukkah. It's not part of the sukkah itself. It's just coming out. So let's say, imagine that this board is coming out of the sukkah. It's not part of, it's just the moment that it's out of the sukkah. So usually we go lenient, but here we go more stringent. And we said that's is a problem, because we said that the moment he carried that board 4 handbreadth, that's caused the entire sukkah to be invalid. So imagine if a person take a board that is a 4 hand breadth in the middle of the sukkah, that invalidates the entire sukkah. Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 629 and is based on the Tur. One may not roof his sukkah with board measuring 4 hand breadth wide. However, if they are less than 4 hand breadth wide, one may roof with them. Some say that the halacha is according with the principle that in disputes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, the halacha is ruled according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Others say that the halacha is according to the opinion of Shmuel, against the principle that in ritual matters the halacha is ruled according to Rab, in dispute of Shmuel. So that's basically the Rosh. But the Ravid said that the halacha is follow Rabbi Meir, and in any event, the prevailing custom is not to make the schach of the sukkah with boards at all, lest one roof the sukkah in manners that you roof a house. So again, the minimum side, it has to be below, to be in a safe side, below than 3, but 3 and 4, you see the disputation. Now we ask what happened if afacham al tzidehem, if one take the boards and turn them on their side. So one may not put the schach of the sukkah with boards 4 hand breadth wide, even if one does so by turning them on the sides, which measure less than 4 hand breadth. So that's basically the idea of Rav Huna, as Rav Nachman agree with. Now we also said that when it's come to the idea of using those boards, people using usually for sukkah branches. The Levush said in Tafresh Kaftet, Nahagu Olam, the minag in many places, lechasod et sukkah ba'arava, that people use the willows to cover the sukkah, or something similar. That's the Ben Ish Chai and Yaakov said. According to Ben Ish Chai, by the way, when he used the word ilan, meaning tree, he said that the Kaf HaChaim said it in Tafresh Kaftet. He said that ilan, it's the numerical value of sukkah. It's 91. So again, the basic condition, it's something that not receive ritual impurity, and it's from the ground. Over the years, we have many questions in regard to the sealing of the sukkah. Basically, the whole idea of what we said now, it's based on discussion in many places in this tractate, is the idea of gzeirat tikra, to put a decree for the roof. The sages forbidden to cover the sukkah with something that is a 4 hand breadth and more, which is in our language is like 32 centimeters, because usually people use it for the home. So the basic decree is that this is has to be a sukkah, not a bait, not a house. Over the years it changed. You see in Shulchan Aruch Harav in Tafresh Kaftet, Seif Lamed Bet, he said as follows: בזמן הזה in our times, שמסככים הבתים בנסרים שאין ברוחבם 3 טפחים, that people use to cover to put the ceiling in their homes in the boards that have the size of 3 hand breadth. So therefore יש לפסול סוכה מסוככת. So according to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, it's a problem. But the Rabbeinu Tam hold that if you have those storehouse or sukkah that you use it for rain and you put it as a ceiling store, even you can move it, that's basically invalidated. The big question is that biblical or rabbinic? But as I said before, if you go just by the code, the Bet Yosef said that we don't use it as a sukkah, as a schach. There is also a question about knei suf. There is a responsa, we don't have the time, but there's a responsa, it's called Shut Bet Israel in Orach Chaim, Siman Vav. He's dealing with the issue of knei suf, if using different reeds, that again, the question is if we can use it, it's grow on the water, and if that's part of the Gzerat Tikra, the rabbinic decree of using that same as a house or not. And again, we don't have the time to deal with that. Those who wants to read it, so there's two places I can send you. One is the Shut Beit Israel, as we said, or Achaim Siman Vav, or is a book called Sukkah. In page Reish Pei Aleph 281, he bring the Chazon Ish that he was very uncomfortable with this type of schach.